Good afternoon. My name is Anissa Blackwell, and I decided to do my presentation on compensating our Division I athletics. So you might ask, what is the overall issue? Now, the issue is that Division I sports are bringing in billions of dollars annually, but who's pocketing the money? Not the players. So all the while they're bringing in this revenue, they're playing the games, many of our athletes are missing out on the fun, the college experience. They're spending a lot of their time in training and at games and meetings, all things of the sort. So just to touch a bit of a brief history on college sports, the National Collegiate Athletic Association, also known as the NCAA, was founded in 1939. So it kind of goes a ways back. If you aren't familiar with the NCAA, they manage about 1,200 institutions. They're kind of the eyes and ears of the college sports world. They're helping them get publicized and the games and all the ins and out of the industry. And as well, I kind of wanted to touch on how it's evolved over time. So we see now, of course, media is very, very prevalent in our society. So now it's easy to go and look up your favorite player's stats and interviews and things of the sort, and you can kind of keep up with them. And as well, we see a push or a move from motivation as to why they're on the sports. Maybe back then players were simply playing for just the love of the game or the scholarships that they would be compensated for. But now we kind of see a shift where many players who are playing Division I do have intentions on moving on to a more professional level. So who's actually getting paid? The NCAA currently produces about $11 billion annually. So this is more than the estimated values of the NBA and also the National Hockey League. So all of this money and revenue is coming in from game tickets and sales, merchandise. You know, you have the bobbleheads, you have your jerseys, video games, which is also coming a lot more popular. Advertisements as well, and also just broadcasting rights. So all of these are different sources of revenue that's coming in into these billions and billions of dollars that we are seeing. And also the money is kind of being divvied out to the NCAA executives, the athletic directors, and also the coaches for the teams. So I kind of wanted to get into the benefits. What will these players see by getting compensated for their hard work? So before we get there, let's just talk about what exactly an employee is. Now, an employee is someone who is working for wages or a salary in exchange for their work. But let's not forget that employees aren't always clocking in and clocking out. We can look at these athletes as employees. They're putting in hours and time weekly, daily for a company, and they're also having to make sure that they're representing the company as well in the right light. So being a college athlete is not all fun and games. So the NCAA makes a policy that athletes shouldn't be working in an athletic field of any more of 20 hours a week and no more than 4 hours a day. Now, I want to direct you, if you can't see it, I apologize. It'll be a lot more clearer in the link that I send you to my PowerPoint presentation. But just to kind of break down with the charts we have over here. So these are the average hours spent per week in season on athletic activities. So for baseball, we have about 42 hours a week that these players are spending dedicated to baseball. Men's basketball, about 40 hours. And football, between 41 and 43 hours a week. Now, if we want to break that down even more, we can look at it on a daily basis. So for baseball, we have about 6 hours a week. For men's basketball, we have about 6.8 hours a day, sorry. And for football, we have about 6.5 hours a day. So this is all time that's been spent strictly to their sport. Student athletes spend these hours in training, at games, traveling, and many other things that are required for that sport. And this overall average of about 40 hours a week that players are spending is actually 3.3 more hours than the average American workload. So just imagine you're working basically a full-time job on top of being a student and on top of making time for friends and family, and most importantly self-love, self-care. So here I found this very interesting. It's a book by Alan Sack and Ellen Sarosky, sorry. The book is titled College Athletes for Hire. I would highly suggest someone to go in and actually read this book. I read an excerpt out of it, and it's really a good source to see the exact perspectives from our athletes. So the book kind of exposes the myth that college students are students first, which we hear a lot, that they are students first. But if you're spending 40 hours a week in practice and at games, you're probably not spending 45 hours a week studying. It's also filled with different testimonies from different players and their experiences, players from the past and players who are currently in the field, and they kind of break down how it's shifted more into a money hungry type of organization. So what if it gets too tough? What if it's just too much? If the workload is too much, you can't fully focus on school and academics, what do these D1 players do? Let's not forget that the priority of these students is to actually be students. Many players in Division I sports are placed on academic scholarships. Therefore, if you were to drop the team or pull out, then your grades also will drop your academic funding also will drop behind that. So let's just say who could actually afford to continue to go to school when half, or in some cases all, of your funding from scholarship is being removed from your student accounts. So another great principle I think that funding our D1 students would give is to learn to save. Allowing college students to collect pay for their hard work can help them to learn money saving habits. So realistically, we know that these players wouldn't be able to work a full-time job or a part-time job at that while being D1 athletes. Their job itself is the sport. So we have athletes who are experiencing maybe 1 to even up to 4 years, however long they do choose to continue to play while they're in school. 1 to 4 years of not having that exchange of currency, not knowing how to properly organize their money and put things in place, so that now if you have them after graduation, that's a skill that they kind of didn't get to acquire those last few years. So now they might have to struggle to figure out how to put money aside responsibly. And I think that's very important as well for those who would choose to continue on into a professional limelight, is knowing how to responsibly spend your money. So speaking of money, we see players and we see them in nice, expensive gear. The schools are, beautiful and just very wealthy. But some of these players, we have to realize that they do come from poverty. They do come from homes that might be single parent households, to where they wouldn't be able to even send money home to family if need be. So here we have a video of Mr. Shabazz Napier. He's a former player of the Connecticut Huskies, and he does I think it's a post-game interview, basically speaking on how he's been struggling since he's been playing in a D1 school. And he kind of goes into saying it's not all peaches and cream in a sense of there are nights where he probably can't afford to fully restock his refrigerator. So he says he goes to bed some nights hungry, and I do think that's a big thing that may be overlooked, is that you might attend a wealthy school, but it does not mean that you're being compensated to fit that lifestyle. I'm gonna have the video here available too if you would like to take a look at it. I'm gonna skip along though. So the most important reason as to why I do think our D1 students should be compensated is because they're putting in the physical work. Players are physically conditioning their bodies on a daily basis, as I mentioned before, 40 hours a week, 5 to 6 hours a day even, of just straight conditioning your body. And sometimes we might put too much of a workload on ourselves, but it's tricky when you're trying to go professional. So what about injuries? Well, just as I said before about wanting to drop out possibly, if you have an injury, that kind of goes your career. What many don't know is that some of these athletes are placed on 1-year renewable contracts for their scholarships. So therefore they would be recompensated each semester or each school year as long as they continue to play with the school. However, if they choose not to, or if they are physically unable to, those contracts go out the window. So now you have a similar incident of where that academic scholarship is being removed from their student bill, and that weight of financial burden is kind of weighing down on them, and that can add a lot of stress where you want to go hard enough on the field or on the court, but you don't want to injure yourself because your body is physically all that you have in order to get you to where your end goal is. And we also have to realize that training is almost as intense as professional athletes are. I'm sure that college athletes who are playing on a basketball team or like a Duke team, they're working just as hard, if not harder, as professional players, because once draft time comes up, they need to be at the right level. They have to be able to keep up with the professionals on an NBA team. They have to be able to be on that same level. So I do feel we can afford to pay billions and millions to our professional athletes. We could squeeze in a few dollars to give out to these students who are really, really working hard and going beyond measure. So of course, we have people who do oppose the idea of compensating these Division I athletes. So many say that scholarships are their compensation and that they shouldn't be any further compensated. I know some schools face the issues of having a lot of funding going to athletic departments, and some people feel that, well, some of that money should shift over to academics. Well, I have a solution, maybe a possible solution as to how we can kind of keep things the way they are and as well compensate our athletes. So typical head coaches of Division I sports teams make about $100,000 a year. Now that's a lot. I do feel that we could kind of break it up a little bit, maybe just 75, maybe 85. Just to break it up a little bit and divvy out that money to the players who are really putting in the hard work. Now, mind you, coaches they're going in, they're at practices, they're at games, they're right along for the journey. But as well, we have to realize we wouldn't have the sports if it wasn't for the players. So I do think that some of that money could be divvied up into the players. And as well, some people feel that it's just simply not fair. How can you give money to players of D1s and not D2s or just regular college? How could you do that? But I feel that it's just based off revenue. D1 sports teams bring in way more revenue than other schools and other institutions. So I feel that it should be more of a ratio pay. Your revenue that you're bringing in for your sports should match a ratio of how much you're getting paid. So this is not to say that a student or athlete at a D2 school couldn't get paid. It's just based off of that ratio in order to kind of keep things fair across the whole board. And lastly, if you're wondering why I care because they're really putting in a lot of work. Hearing that athletes are working over what's considered a full-time job in today's corporate world is crazy. Because I am a student, a full-time student, and I oftentimes struggle just to keep up with my workload. And as well, I am a resident advisor here on campus, and I do hear sometimes that maybe that compensation of, lessening a student bill is all that someone needs. I do receive free housing, but I do as well receive I am salary paid, so I do get paid monthly, but I can only imagine of how I would be able to financially actually take care of myself if it weren't for those extra pays, because my job itself, similar to a lot of these players, does take up a lot of my free and extra time. And I can only imagine having that workload as well from school and academics, and having to extra stressor of having to figure out how you can afford everything, because not everyone comes from similar backgrounds. So I definitely do relate to a lot of these stories that I've heard through my research on this project, and I definitely am all for funding our D1 athletes. I do feel that they're putting in the work, they're putting in the time and the effort, and they should be paid just as anyone else gets paid on their job as an employee. So thank you.